Hi, I hope that you're doing well. This is Miriam. Welcome to my channel. It's been a while, guys, right, since my last video, and I'm so happy to be back. Today I'm going to speak about a topic I've been wanting to speak about for a long time. Because if you know me, you will know that Miriam loves to talk about culture. That's one of the reasons why I love traveling. Like when I travel, it's not even so much about the sights, the landscapes. It's a lot more about the culture and the food and meeting the people and seeing how people live in different countries. This is my vibe when I'm traveling. I did make a video a few years ago titled Growing Up Black in France, where I shared about my experience. However, there are so many layers to this topic that making just one video is not enough. And one of the reasons why I wanted to make a video about this is because it's in correlation to my own life, and throughout my life I've had to navigate being a third culture kid. I've had to navigate being born in a country that is not my parents' country. How do I identify? And especially like moving to the UK as a teenager, finding my feet in the British community when I'm not from the UK, and all of these things throughout my life I've had to navigate. And so I thought it would be great to make a video to speak about it. And hopefully if you're a third culture kid, or if you're someone who is interested about culture, or you're curious to know how do Miriam identify, she has this YouTube channel where she makes videos about Ghana. But how does she identify? Is she Ghanaian? Is she French? Who is this girl? Like, maybe if you're wondering, I hope that this video will give you more clarity about how I identify and my experiences. Okay, so first of all, what is a third culture kid? I don't really tend to like tags a lot. Yeah, I feel like these days there's a term for everything, and I don't tend to really like that, but I thought that, this makes the most sense. So the definition, it says that it's someone who has spent a significant part of their development years in a culture different from their parents' culture or passport country. They develop a third culture, a unique identity that blends their parents' culture with the culture in which they grew up. And then another definition also says third culture kids are people who were raised in a different culture than their parents for a large part of the entirety of their childhood and adolescence. I prefer the first definition because in my case, my parents' culture is also my culture. Because of how my parents raised me, their influence is so big that their culture became my culture. And so I don't think I was raised in a different culture than my parents. I'm also maybe in a different country than my parents, in a different environment. But I think that my parents did very well in transmitting their culture to me as well. So that's why it relates more so to the first definition, which says a third culture kid is someone who has spent a significant part of their development years in a culture, or I would say in a country, different from their parents' culture or passport country. Okay, so let me start with presenting myself for those who don't know. So my name is Miriam. My name is actually Miriam. I have anglicized my name when I moved to the UK, and so I say Miriam. My parents are from Ghana, and I know that it's very annoying when people say my parents are from, because if your parents are from, then you are. Hold on, I have not finished. Okay, so my parents are from Ghana, so they moved. So Ghana, for those who don't know, is a beautiful country in West Africa. When you look at the Africa map, it's actually next to Togo and Ivory Coast. And in the world today, and even among Africans, a lot of people put Ghana and Nigeria together. Nigeria is another country in West Africa, and a lot of people tend to think that Nigeria and Ghana are like next to each other, like they're twin countries. But the reality is that Ghana as a country geographically is closest to Togo and Ivory Coast than it is to Nigeria. And so Ghana is a bit like the odd African country in the midst of two big francophone African countries. The odd anglophone countries that stand out amidst the two francophone African countries. So that's the country. My parents are from there. My parents moved to France. So France, I think a lot of people know where France is. They moved to France in Europe in the early 80s, I think, in the mid 80s. So I was born in France from Ghanaian parents, and then I moved. That's when it gets complicated, I can say. And then I moved to the UK when I was 13. So 13 is the development years, like it's a pre-teen years. So you're basically moving away from childhood to becoming a teenager. So that's when I moved to the UK. Now I'm not 13, I'm let's just say I was born in 94, so just do your own calculation. So I have these 3 different countries. I grew up in these 3 different cultures. So how did I identify growing up? First of all, for me, culture is a positive thing. I loved being Ghanaian. I love being exposed to different cultures. So me having a different culture, having parents that are Ghanaians has never been a negative thing. In fact, I love it. I love being of African origin. So how was it growing up for me? It's very interesting actually, because I grew up in a very multicultural environment. In a lot of people's minds, especially people who don't really know much about France and maybe know about France from like the movies and Emily in Paris, and often people that have never really been to France or are not French, they tend to think that France is one way. Like France is just the white man or the white woman with the beret. No, like France is multicultural. France is mixed. Being French comes with a lot of different colors. And so I grew up in a very multicultural environment, especially because I think I'm from the suburbs as well, and I'm from the city as well. I mean, I think French people who are like raised in the villages, French villages, don't tend to see a lot of diversity. But I grew up in the city. I had like people who had like North African origin, French people whose parents were Vietnamese, you know, but as we identify as French because we are French, you know, we have the French passport. As long as you have the French passport, you're born in France or you're raised in France, you are French. And so we are French, just of different origins, but we are French. And I also grew up with French people who were originally like ethnically French as well, if that makes sense. And that's how France looks like. France is multicultural, even though racist French people don't want to believe it. France is black, France is white, France is everything. And so that's how I grew up, even though on TV growing up there was lack of diversity. Like what I was seeing on TV growing up did not reflect my environment. I could count on my fingers the number of black people that were on TV at the time in the early 2000s. So my parents are Ghanaian. One funny thing that I say is that at home, when your parents are from a specific culture, you grew up with that culture. Anyway, that was the case for me. And so that's why I find it very funny when I tell people that I'm French, because I'm also French as well as being Ghanaian. A lot of people tend to think that I grew up eating frogs, and they just have this very stereotypical view of how French is and how French people are and how we grew up. But the reality is that was not my case. And the reason I think is because I grew up with Ghanaian parents, and so the culture that was at home for me was Ghanaian. And that's the case, I think, for a lot of people even today. If you don't know about France, you would think that young people go out, or people in millennials, they go to these restaurants and they just eat frogs and they just eat French food. But that's not the case. Like when you go to France today, even when you go to Paris, Japanese restaurants are filled up. You will see so many Japanese restaurants. You will see so many, like kebab is one of the iconic French snack food, like kebab sandwiches, and kebabs are not necessarily French. And I would say that my culture was a bit different to, I guess, the other kids in my class who were ethnically white, had French origins, because I'm sure the way it was for them at home was not the same for me. Because whereas I was at home eating banku, I know that my white French friend was probably at home eating puree and stuff like that. Even though we're both French, we had different cultures, and I was aware of that. However, even with that, I identified as Ghanaian, but I also identified as French. I consumed so much French media, French music. Even though I say that I ate Ghanaian food at home, I'm a lover of bread. When it comes to breakfast, when it comes to even my personality, I think people know now that French people are a bit more direct. And I know that when I first came to the UK, I know that British people, they have very fancy ways of saying things. And I'm not saying that's bad, but I don't. I just say things how it is. And I do know that my friends sometimes make fun of me because of the way that I say things. I don't really have filter, and that's how French people are. We just say things because we treat people like adults. We trust people to take things the way that they're supposed to take it. We don't feel like we should sugarcoat everything. We are polite, but we don't put much filter. And so all of these elements are the French part of me. So I did feel French. However, I know that whenever I travel to Ghana, for example, for holidays, I felt a sense of freedom that I never felt in France. And that also may be because of my personality. At that time, when I was younger, I used to be quite timid and socially I think I had a bit of social anxiety when I was young, and so it would take me a lot of courage to go to people. And however, whenever I went to Ghana, whenever I traveled to Ghana, I felt so free. I felt like the best part of myself. What is very interesting is that I wasn't born in Ghana. I did not grow up in Ghana. However, I have childhood memories. I remember like sleeping over in my grandma's house. I remember that my 18th birthday, I spent it in Ghana. I celebrated it in Ghana. I invited my whole neighborhood. I think even now at 31, we still speak about my 18th birthday. Like my mom always brings it up. And so in Ghana, I felt Ghanaian. However, there were also things that made me feel like I wasn't as Ghanaian as the other kids who were born there. And that's often people's projection and how people treated me. As a young girl, I didn't think much about the fact that I'm French, as in I was born in France and I'm coming from abroad. For me, I was Ghanaian, so whenever I traveled to Ghana, I was traveling to my country. However, people made me feel, as I grew up later on and I traveled there in my later years, people made me feel that I was different. They brought it to my attention, and that's kind of when I switched in regards to my understanding of culture and how complicated it feels sometimes. Because I remember, I give you an anecdote. I was probably 16, I think I was 16 then, but I remember, or 15. So my uncles, oh, you guys are probably gonna cringe, especially if you're like African, you would probably cringe, but back then I didn't know. So I used to call my uncles by names, and one of them has my brother's age. You know, my oldest brother is older than my uncle, and so it's very weird to call your uncle, who also feels like your brother, uncle. And I never saw it as a problem, but I know that one day, like, one of my cousins in Ghana came up to me and he was like, oh, but you see how we are not allowed to call him by his name, but you are calling him by name and he doesn't say anything. And that's when I realized that, wow, that's true. How come when my other cousins call my uncles by name, how come my cousins would never feel comfortable calling my uncles by names? Or if they did, my uncles would probably be like, what are you doing? But how come for me it's okay? And that really kind of burst my bubble. It probably wasn't right for my cousin to say that, but I guess we're all young. You know how when you're young, when someone is allowed to do something but you're not, it's like, how come that person is allowed to do that but not me? It was probably that kind of thing. And I think that burst my bubble a little bit, because that's when I realized that I am welcomed here, but I guess I'm treated differently. I'm not really that different. I was treated as a guest more than anything else, you know, like even family members, and even though I belong, do I really? I think maybe an important context to that is the fact that my mom, both my parents actually, are the oldest in the family. So my parents have like 6, 7, 8 siblings, and so I'm actually the daughter. I'm the only daughter of the oldest child. The reason why I was also treated with respect could have also been because I'm the child of the oldest, but it could have also been because I'm from abroad and things like that. Even though at the core is great, but it can make you feel like you're different. And since then, I started calling my uncles uncles. Even with that, I've always felt comfortable in Ghana, but there's often small things. In France, you feel like you're Ghanaian. However, when you go to Ghana, you feel a bit like a guest. And it's like, okay, so where do I really belong, sort of thing. But even with all of that, I've learned to accept it. Learned to accept the over hospitality, the hospitality that is a bit too much. I've learned to accept it. So that's the aspect of traveling to Ghana and feeling sometimes like a guest, even though it was never a problem for me, because it is what it is. I'm Ghanaian whether you like it or not. And also because of my personality, people quickly forget that I wasn't born in Ghana and stuff like that. But what's even more interesting in it is being asked, where are you from Ghanaians? And this is something that I've experienced a lot, even in the UK, even on this channel. Sometimes they ask because of my accent, and I have a mixture of different accents, and it's like, where are you from? And sometimes before I've even opened my mouth, you don't really look Ghanaian, and I'm like here wondering, how does Ghanaian look like? Oh, but it's never been offensive to me, honestly. It's never offensive to me. But then you can understand why. Where do I really belong? Like when I'm in France, I'm Ghanaian. When I'm in Ghana, you really Ghanaian. When you're in the, it's so interesting. But it's okay to not fit in a box. I don't think there's one way to look. Let's speak about where it gets complicated, or where it gets even more interesting. When I moved to the UK, I had never felt more French than when I first moved to the UK, guys. When I was in France, I felt French, but I also felt more Ghanaian. But when I moved to the UK, I had never felt more French, because I couldn't identify with the British community. I couldn't identify as a British. I didn't feel British. I didn't identify with the British Ghanaian, because in the UK there's a Ghanaian, there's a huge Ghanaian community, even more than in France. They would speak and stuff. I wouldn't be able to relate because we don't have the same pop culture references. I couldn't even so much even relate to the Caribbean. In France, yeah, I think it's changed now a little bit, but back then, French black people, there was something very natural about us. Like, we didn't really wear wigs. Back then, didn't have that much makeup. Like French black community back in the early 2000s, we didn't really make noise. Very like calm. And so we moved to the UK and you see black woman with like bold hair, full of confidence, and that gave me so much courage and confidence as a black person. However, in some way I felt different because I wasn't as confident as the black people that I saw in the UK. And also I was in London. So London, black London girls, they're very bold. I wasn't like black London girls. But one thing that I want to add to that though is that people shouldn't stereotype black people. Sometimes when you're black, people like to box you in, and if you don't fit in that box, you're odd. And I remember when I was in school, in high school in the UK, me being the shy girl, also coming from France, and I remember that the people in my class, especially one black guy, found it very hard to accept that I was calm. Like, if you're black and you're calm, there's something wrong with you. He used to like almost bully me. Back then I didn't understand why, but growing up I realized that he just had a hard time accepting that you can be black and be calm. And I think now there's a lot of conversation about it. There's a lot of black people on YouTube, like you can watch a lot of these videos, who come up and say that they had a hard time. People been giving them hard times because they were quiet and they had introverted personalities. There's a lot of people that still don't accept that black people can be introverted. And that was just his own insecurity and his own discomfort. And so I think there's a lot to be said about accepting how people are. And those who were like me also came up to me, and so I'm telling you, like, don't worry if people reject you, because the right people will come to you eventually. So that was the thing about me. So I didn't feel, even till now, I don't really feel British. I feel French born Ghanaian. I feel Ghanaian. French is difficult, but a huge part of me identifies as French as well. I don't fully feel French all the time, even though I am French. Even the racist people don't want to accept the fact that you feel French. Racist French people tend to separate the French white and the French. No, it's nonsense. However, I don't just feel French. A part of me feels French, but I feel more Ghanaian. And yeah. So then my video titled Growing Up Black in France. There were a few questions, but I also want to answer in a video in case you're curious and you want to know. So the first question that came up was, what cities in France are best for raising African children where there is least racism? And I remember answering that question and saying, as a person, don't limit yourself. But now I would say the same thing, but just to be more practical, I would say you would find racists everywhere and you would find nice people everywhere. However, just like other countries, places that are not used to seeing diversity, you're more prone to find people who stare at you. If you go to villages and you don't go to the big cities, you're more likely to feel odd than when you're in Paris or you're in Toulouse or you're in Bordeaux, and you're most likely to be like one of the only black families if you go to a village somewhere with like 500 inhabitants. But then, as I said in the comment, please don't let racism stop you from living. The second thing, Mimi, in the coming years, if you could raise your children in any city in the world, where would that be? I would say I would like my children to be free. I would really like my children to be free, to be in a country where they feel free. I'm so big on freedom. And I think before I even answered that question, a question that I had before, I don't think I included it here, but was, why did you decide to move to the UK? In France, back then, I think times may have changed now a little bit because there's more representation, a little bit more representation, guys, just a little bit more. Because when I travel to France, I still see a lack of representation on TV. There's a lack of representation of ethnic minorities. That's just the fact. And especially coming from the UK, it's even more obvious because the UK is so different. You can see more diversity on television. So back in 2000, 2006, 2008, before I moved to the UK, was even worse. The reason why my parents decided to move me to the UK, it wasn't really because of that, but it was also because in school it was a bit difficult for me, and we heard that the education system in the UK was better and there was more diversity. My parents thought that once I moved to the UK, once Miriam moved to the UK, she would feel more free. And that's exactly what happened. It was great for me. It opened my mind so much. So yes, so in the coming years, if you could raise your children in any city in the world, where would that be? I don't know. I'm in a weird place in my life right now where I'm like, Europe sucks. The West sucks. And I feel like people live to work and they don't work to live. And when you travel to Africa, when you travel to Southeast Asia, you can see that people are really living. People are not slaves to their work and their jobs. They're living life, right? I would love to one day when my kids grow up and they're being asked, how was your childhood? For them to be like, oh, I grew up where I felt free. So I don't know where that is. I just know that the West, I don't know if the West is it. There's so many restrictions. So I don't know where I would want to raise my children. I just know that I want it to be a free place where they feel free. And the third question was, hello, I would like to know, why did you decide to move to the UK and which country do you prefer? Okay, yeah, I answered that question. However, one thing that I would say is you don't need to, you can still grow up in France and be free. It depends on, I think times have changed now, maybe. Back then there was no Instagram, back then there was no representation. Now French people, ethnic minorities in France are literally making things happen in France right now. When you think about music, when you think about sports, and so times have changed now compared to where I was growing up. And the reality is, as a black person, you have to work harder to to remain confident, to not dim your light. I want to encourage you that regardless of where you're from, be your highest self. Be your highest self. There's no one way to be Ghanaian. There's no one way to be one thing. You can be different things at the same time, and that is okay. And about the which country do I prefer question between the UK and France, I would say no comment. But about Ghana, of course, Ghana has my heart. My identity goes beyond my culture. My identity is who I am at the core. So that's the most important thing. So yeah, thank you so much guys for watching. I hope that this was interesting for you. Share in the comments your experiences with that. How do you identify? What are some of the difficulties that you faced being a third culture kid? What are the things that you love about it? If this has given me more clarity about who I am as well, don't forget to say it in the comments. Thank you so much guys for watching, and see you in the next video. Bye.